Hello and welcome to the Businesstalk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. It is my great pleasure to welcome Professor Cassie Holmes, Professor of Marketing and Behavioral Decision Making and holder of the Bud Knapp Marketing Professorship at UCLA Anderson School of Management as our esteemed guest on today's episode. In this episode, Professor Casey will share valuable insights from her latest book, Happier Hour: How to Beat Distraction, Expand Your Time, and Focus on What Matters Most. Professor Casey Holmes studies happiness with a particular focus on the role of time. Her research explores questions such as how prioritizing time over money can enhance happiness, how the meaning of happiness evolves throughout one's lifetime, and how people derive joy from both extraordinary and everyday experiences. Across these investigations, her findings consistently highlight the deep happiness that comes from connecting personally with others and being fully present at the moment. Professor Holmes' research has been published in such top-tier academic journals as Psychological Science and the Journal of Consumer Research. Popular accounts of her work have been featured on NPR and have appeared in such publications as The Economist, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, The Financial Times, Scientific American, and the Boston Globe. Her work on giving time was featured in New York Times Magazine's 32 Innovations That Will Change Your Tomorrow. She was identified among the best 40 business professors under 40 in Poets and Quants, and she received the Early Career Award for her distinguished scholarly contributions to her field from both the Association of Consumer Research and the Society of Consumer Psychology. Prior to joining UCLA Anderson, Professor Holmes was a tenured faculty member at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where she was an award-winning teacher of strategic brand management. She earned her PhD in marketing from Stanford University and her BA from Columbia University as a psychology major. So, kicking off this exciting conversation, let's warmly welcome Professor Cassie Holmes to the show. It's a real privilege to welcome you, Professor Cassie. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Thank you. Professor, you argue that time, not money, is our most precious resource. How did your research lead to this conclusion?
Yeah, well, I mean, just the basic observation that how we spend the hours of our days sum up to the years of our lives highlights that time is not just a resource towards something else, but it is actually the fabric of our life. Um, Money is also a resource that we can invest and need for the sort of outcomes that we want in our life. But really, time is both the means to an end as well as an end in itself. And so, in my early work, I was looking at being a business at a business school. I was looking at, what's the effect of focusing on time rather than money as our most critical resource? And what I found was that it led actually people to be happier and more satisfied in their lives because they spent their time invested in their time in ways that mattered to them, that were aligned with their values, that aligned with their purpose. And that intentionality of thinking about what is important comes also through the lens of time. That we have found in our research that when people take a broader perspective of their time, thinking about their years and their life overall, rather than just the hours of one's day, what that does is it leads people to recognize what ultimately matters for them and spend their time in ways that are important to them, not simply reacting to what is urgent.
Many of us feel constantly time poor. What are the
Mhm.
biggest misconceptions people have about time and busyness?
Yeah, so we do often feel time poor, and that what time poverty is, it's that acute feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it. And time poverty is subjective. So it is how much you feel like you have available to achieve what you set out to do. Now, that's good news because what it means is that we have more control than we think in terms of what we take on as the things that we want to get done, the things that we want to achieve. It also means that we can influence it by our sense of confidence and efficacy. And if we feel like we are more able, we have the energy, or we feel like we are more productive, like able to accomplish the tasks that we set out to do, then it actually makes us feel like we have more time because we feel less of that sense of constraint. And we actually showed this in some of our work where we found that when people feel time poor, which is a lot of us, and some demographics are more susceptible to it than others. But it also not only is pervasive, but it has negative effects. It makes us, for instance, less nice because when we're in a hurry, we're less likely to slow down and help others out. But we found in our research that actually, when people spend their time to help someone, if they spend 30 minutes doing something for someone else that they weren't already planning to do, then it actually makes them feel like they have more time than those who spent 30 minutes on themselves doing something that they weren't already planning to do. Um, because even though we're like, oh, giving time away should make us actually have less time, what it does is it makes people think like, realize like, oh my gosh, I can actually accomplish a lot with the time that I have. And that gives you a sense of like a greater sense of how much you can accomplish with your time more generally, thereby increasing our perception of how much time we have. So, in terms of your questions of misperceptions, one is that we have more control over how much time we feel like we have than we think. Another is that if we think, and I have thought this, when I feel particularly time poor, that is the pressures of having young kids, a full-time job, the never-ending pile of chores, being a good partner, being a good friend. Sometimes, or I have moments in my career been like, oh my God, the answer is I need to quit everything because if I had a whole lot more time and, to spend however I wanted, then surely I would be happier. But that is not true. And our data shows that there actually is such thing as having too much available or discretionary time. So in that work, we were analyzing data from the American Time Use Survey. So it looks at tens of thousands of working and non-working Americans, how they spent a regular day, and we could relate that to their self-reported life satisfaction or their happiness. And we found a consistent pattern of results, including in that data set, that it's inverted U shape. So like an arc or a rainbow. And what that means is that actually happiness goes down on both ends of the spectrum. So yes, people with too little time are less happy, those who are time poor, because they feel greater stress. But we also see on the other side, those with too much time are also less happy. And what that is driven by is that they feel less productive. They feel a lower sense of purpose. That is, research shows that we are averse to being idle. And so when you spend all the hours of your day with nothing to show for it, it undermines our sense of purpose. And from that, we feel less satisfied. So another misconception is that for greater happiness, it's not about having a whole lot more time. The answer is that it really depends on how you spend the time that you have.
Professor, you talk about changing how we perceive time. Can you explain how perception plays a role in feeling more fulfilled?
Yeah, so it's both a question of what activities we spend on, but it's also how we engage in those activities, how invested we are when spending them. Because often when we're distracted, thinking about what's next or planning in our minds or on our phones, that it pulls us out of activities, even those that are potentially really positive and the sources of satisfaction. And so there are several ways that I explain in my book, Happier Hour, to make it so that for those really potentially positive activities, we really pay attention. And that comes actually often from recognizing that our time is, in fact, precious and limited. Um, we found that as people get older and realize the time in life is more limited, then they start savoring ordinary experiences more, such that they enjoy as much happiness from those ordinary experiences as from extraordinary experiences. Also, it makes them um, find greater happiness in um, activities that are sort of calm, contented. They don't just have to be like super exciting or hard to achieve or reach or access. Um, and so, or if there's an activity that is sort of part of your day, but a source of joy, when you recognize that that isn't going to continue to happen every day, and certainly not like it does now, then that makes people pay more attention, savor those ordinary joys more, so they have a bigger influence on the satisfaction we feel in our lives.
From your experience, what are the some simple but powerful ways listeners can start sidestepping distractions in their daily lives?
Yeah. One is for those times that are very important for you, whether it is your opportunity to get into that deep thinking work, anything that you would want to get into a flow state. So, a flow state is where we are challenged, but we are at our best. We are applying our skills, we cannot get into a flow state when we are distracted on our phones, incoming pings. Um, and so, for those times, whether it's doing your deep work, is logging out of email, putting your phone away, or even when you're doing something that is enjoyable, like having dinner with your partner or having dinner with your friends, or your kids, is putting your phone away during that time. There was an interesting experiment where well, first of all, the one showing how distracted we are. So they would ping people over the course of their day and ask, what are you doing? What are you thinking about? And how do you currently feel? And what they found is that we tend not to be thinking about what we're currently doing, as in our mind is wandering 47% of the time. Almost half of the time, our mind is elsewhere. They also found that we are less happy when our mind is elsewhere compared to when we are engaged and focused on the present activity. And that is across different activity types. So it highlights the importance of not being distracted for potential happiness. Also, the phones as being that source of distraction. There's an interesting study where they had friends dining together, and they told half of them to put their phones away out of sight. The others could leave their phones on the table, not even interacting with them, but the mere presence of the phone. And they found that those whose phones were away enjoyed the dining experience more. They felt more connected to the folks they were dining with because they were less distracted. So, for those moments where you want to get into that deep thinking work, or you really want to be present and connected with whom you're with, put the phone away out of sight so that you can get into the moment.
You emphasize designing a schedule with purpose. What are a few practical steps to move from a reactive to a purpose-driven schedule?
Yeah. One is even understanding what your purpose is. What is it that drives you and fulfills you? And understanding that purpose sounds sort of lofty and it might be hard. It sounds like, oh my gosh, how can I understand what my purpose is? There's a very helpful exercise that makes it more tractable, the 5 whys exercise, which I describe in Happier Hour. And what it is you ask, for what you do for work or how you spend the majority of your time, the first step is asking yourself, why do you do that? And then your answer for that, which is typically the job description, or if you say, to make money, then you ask yourself, well, why is that important? And that allows you to sort of dig in and be like, oh, wait, the reason I spend my time in this way in order to make money is actually it's for this. And then you ask yourself, based off of your last answer, 5 layers of why. And really, that allows you to dig into what drives you personally. What is that intrinsic driver? What is your purpose? And that is so helpful because you can use it as a filter of what to say yes to, what to say no to. It allows you to identify what are those activities that are really crucial towards you achieving these sort of higher order goals. It also makes the unfun parts of your work less onerous or less annoying because you know the why of it. And it makes the good parts of your work joyful because you're like, oh, I am, living my purpose. This is so great. So the five whys exercise is very helpful in clarifying your purpose so that you can make sure you protect time um, in your work week, even for those activities that ultimately matter. Because there's lots of noise, like there are those meetings or emails that aren't necessarily going to help you achieve ultimately what you're setting out to do. But at least this way, you'll make sure that you've protected the time.
In happier hour, you mentioned that even small changes can have a huge impact. Can you share one small habit that listeners could implement today to feel more present?
Yeah. Um, so one is putting your phone away during those important times. Another is recognizing, as I mentioned before, that just because something is an everyday experience now, it doesn't mean it's going to continue to happen every day. And we are subject to hedonic adaptation, which is our psychological propensity to get used to things over time. And so when you do the same thing again and again, when you're with the same person over and over, they stop having as intense of an emotional impact on you. So it's good that we are adaptive in the face of negative experiences because it makes us resilient and get through hard times. But it's bad when we also get used to life's good stuff that such that we stop noticing it anymore. And so I share the example. I My daughter is now 9 years old, and we have gone on a coffee date each week since she was little, and I would drop her off at her preschool on my way to work, and we would stop at a coffee shop, but it wasn't the coffee. I mean, and she has hot chocolate, not coffee. But it was this half hour each week that was sort of a routine task that we turned into a ritual. It was time for the two of us just to be together, to chat. Um, and I recognize that now she's 9, but when she's 12, she might want to go to the coffee shop with her friends instead of me. And so I counted how many times have we gone on a coffee date already in our life? How many times will we go on a coffee date in the future? And I recognize that we have about 36% of our coffee dates left. And this is very impactful because it made me realize that even though she's only 9 years old, we have much less than half left. And what this does is it drives me to make the time, even when I'm busy and have a lot going on, we make sure that that half hour that we spend each week, that we do spend it, but it also makes me pay attention because instead of like being on my phone or thinking about all the other things I have to do, I'm like, no, this is the time that matters. And also, even though it's only 30 minutes, it very much influences how I feel in the rest of the week, right? It's like I look forward to these dates. So it's not just the 30 minutes. I feel happy looking forward to them. I feel happy when I remember them. Also, when I'm assessing how satisfied am I in my life overall, those 30 minutes and the relationship that I have with my daughter as a consequence of those really focused 30 minutes has a very big effect. And so when it comes to time and happiness, it is not about how much time you have available. As we said, there's such thing as having too much time. It's also not about how much time you spend on any given activity because it's about the quality of that time. If you're really focused on those activities that are sources of connection and fulfillment, or on those work activities where you're really digging deep and creating something, that it's about the quality, not the quantity, that produces greater satisfaction.
Professor, you distinguish between full days and fulfilling days. What's the key difference and how can we shift towards the latter?
Yeah, it's very much like I just said, when you are have spent some of the time that day on an activity that is in line with your purpose, that you have absolutely been invested in it, then at the end of the day, at the end of the week, looking back on your years, you feel satisfaction because you've invested in what matters to you.
What surprised you most when teaching your course applying the science of happiness to life design to MBA students?
What has surprised me is how impactful these learnings are. And in hearing from students over the course, so it's a 10-week course, hearing how it's changing their life during that time, but also hearing from my students from prior years, it's really satisfying. And in the book and like in my course, I share a lot of different exercises and strategies. Not every exercise or strategy is similarly or the most helpful for everyone, but every single one of them, those exercises or strategies, is mentioned by at least one person as the most helpful. So it also highlights the sort of variety or the individual ways that we find the sort of that different strategies will be helpful for different people, and that it is important for folks to really try them out so that you can figure out for yourself what is the most helpful and continue to apply that going forward.
Professor, looking back, what do you think your own happiest hours have taught you about what truly matters?
Well, as I shared, my happiest hours are those that allow me to sort of create happiness, both through my research, the creation of knowledge about what makes people happy and spending their time, the dissemination of that knowledge about what makes people happy through my teaching, but also the cultivating of happiness within my community, which includes my family. So for me, those ways of spending time that bring me such joy are like those coffee dates with my daughter, where it is about our relationship and that connection and happiness. It is about connecting with my students and having them sharing and hearing the impact of the work on their lives. So when I am spending, and it's clear to me I'm spending my time in ways that are aligned with my purpose and values, then it's so happy.
Professor, my last question. If someone listening feels overwhelmed and doesn't know where to start, what's the first step you recommend they take to reclaim their time and happiness?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say listen to the book and not like there's also the audiobook. And I'm saying listening because if you're so overwhelmed, you're like, oh my God, I'm not going to have any time to sit down and actually read a book. But the audiobook allows you to listen while you're doing other things. And so it doesn't take additional time. But what the book does do is it allows you to see that you do have more control than you think. It will give you that sense of motivation to sort of to go for it. And gives you the confidence to do so. But also, what it will do is it will give you these various exercises so you could try to identify for yourself, well, what are ways of spending time for you that's satisfying? So, for instance, the time tracking exercise is so helpful. It doesn't take more time. What it is you writing down how you're spending your time, and as importantly, as you come out of those activities, rating how you feel. And that allows you to take stock of, like, oh, actually, there's these activities that are right there in how I'm already spending that produce satisfaction. And then you can also see, like, you know what, I'm spending time, a lot of time on these other things that maybe aren't as important. And maybe you don't even have to do. So the time tracking exercise is very clarifying on what time you have to work with, as well as what are those times that are sources of satisfaction.
Listeners, as we come to the close of today's episode, I want to extend my deepest gratitude to Professor Cassie Holmes for joining us and sharing her incredible insights. Through her thoughtful research and her profound book, Happier Hour, How to Beat Distraction, Expand Your Time, and Focus on What Matters Most, Professor Holmes has illuminated the profound ways that how we can manage our time can shape our happiness and well-being. Her work reminds us that joy is often found not in extraordinary moments alone, but in being fully present with those around us. A message that feels more important now than ever. We are honored to have had the opportunity to learn from her. Thank you, Professor Holmes, and thank you, our listeners, for joining us. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you, Professor Holmes.
Thank you so much.